Julian's voice, filtering through the phone's speaker, was a thing of chilling, civilized smoothness, a stark contrast to the chaos and wreckage surrounding Charlotte and Mia. It was the voice of a confident predator, a wolf in a bespoke suit, speaking to two lambs it knew it had successfully cornered. For a moment, Charlotte froze. But then, something inside her shifted. The paralyzing fear of the past few days began to anneal into something else. A cold, hard resolve. She had lost her husband, the illusion of her perfect life, and had nearly lost her daughter to madness. She had nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing left to lose is a dangerous person. She took a deep breath, motioning for Mia to stay silent, and picked up the phone. Her voice, when it came, was as cool and controlled as Julian's, a deliberate mimicry. "Mr. Julian," she said. "What a surprise. I wasn't aware you had my number." A brief pause on the other end, perhaps a flicker of surprise at her tone. "Ah, Mrs. Ashworth," he finally said, the false cheer in his voice more pronounced. "I have a great many things. Your husband was a very generous man with information, when properly motivated. I trust you received our message that you were not to go anywhere." "Your message was a bit theatrical," Charlotte countered, her eyes glancing at the miraculously intact plate glass window. "What do you want?" Such directness. "I like that," Julian said. "It saves time. As Mr. Sterling explained, your husband was holding something for me. A family heirloom, you might say. An item of great historical and sentimental value to my family. I simply want it back." "I have no idea what you're talking about. My house was just torn apart by something I can't explain, and you're calling me about an heirloom." "Ah, that," Julian said, and Charlotte could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "The house has a temper. It doesn't like to be disturbed, and it especially doesn't like people who try to take what belongs to it. Consider it an encouragement to expedite your search. Find the item, and perhaps the house will calm down." The cold truth of his words horrified her. He knew about what happened in the house. He wasn't just an external threat. He was connected to the nightmare within. "What item?" Charlotte pressed. "Tell me what I'm looking for." "Ethan knew what it was," Julian said evasively. "All you need to know is that it is small, old, and very important. It belongs to the land. It belongs to me. You have 24 hours, Mrs. Ashworth. 24 hours to find it and show me a sign of progress. Otherwise, I'm afraid our next visit will be far less cordial, and the house's anger will be the least of your worries." The line went dead. Charlotte slowly lowered the phone. 24 hours. An invisible clock had started ticking. They were no longer just victims. They'd been conscripted into a deadly scavenger hunt. "Mom," Mia whispered, her eyes wide. "He knows about the ghosts." "He's more than knows, honey," Charlotte said, her mind working with a terrible clarity. "I think he's controlling them. Or at the very least, he's the one who woke them up." She looked around the ruined living room. They couldn't stay here, but they couldn't leave either. Julian had made that clear. They were trapped on his board. The only way to survive was to play his game and find a way to flip the table. "All right," Charlotte said, her voice filled with a new steel. "If he wants us to find something, then we'll find it. We're tearing this house apart." Ethan's study was a scene of targeted devastation. The architectural models, symbols of his dreams and accomplishments, lay in shattered pieces on the floor. Books had been flung from shelves, papers scattered everywhere. It wasn't a random mess. It was a desecration. "They were looking," Mia said, standing at the threshold, seeming afraid to enter. "The things in the house, they were looking for it too. And they didn't find it," Charlotte said, a spark of hope igniting. "Which means your father hid it very, very well." They began the arduous task of cleaning, but their purpose was different. Every book picked up was shaken, every stack of papers carefully examined. It was a forensic search of Ethan's secret life. Charlotte tried to be methodical, starting with the desk. She went through every page of Ethan's ledger again, looking for any unusual word or symbol. Mia, meanwhile, wandered the room, her eyes unfocused, one hand trailing lightly over objects. "What are you doing?" Charlotte asked. "Feeling," Mia replied. "Everything in this room feels wrong, angry, scared, like touching a bruise." She stopped at the bookcase, where the Litchfield County history book lay face down on the floor, its spine broken. "Except this." She picked up the book. "This feels different. It feels quiet, important." Charlotte took the book from Mia. She had skimmed it before, but now she reread it with a new focus, searching for a clue, anything. She reread the chapter on the Scorpion cult. It mentioned a heart of power, an object the cult believed was a nexus of the land's energy, but it didn't describe what it looked like or where it might be found. As she was reading, the one remaining working lamp in the room, a heavy brass desk lamp of Ethan's, began to flicker. But it wasn't the random flickering from before. It flashed in a steady, deliberate rhythm. 2 short flashes, 1 long, then 2 short again. "What is it doing?" Charlotte whispered. Mia moved closer, her eyes fixed on the light. "It's not it," she said. "It's him. I can feel him. He's trying." 2 short, 1 long, 2 short. The rhythm repeated. It wasn't Morse code. It was something else. Charlotte looked down at the open page in her hands, and then she saw it. At the end of a paragraph describing the cult's rituals, there was a small endnote, a citation. Endnote number 212, 2, 1, 2. She scrambled to the reference section at the back of the book. Endnote 212 cited a source. Private Journals of Ebenezer Thorne, founder of the Maple Creek Historical Society, unpublished, archived at Town Library. It was a dead end. They couldn't leave the house to go to the library. Frustration hit her. "It's no use," she said. "No," Mia said, still staring at the lamp. "He isn't just showing us the number. He's pointing at the book itself." She placed her hand on the bookcase, just above where the history book had fallen. "He's saying the answer is near here. Right here." Spurred by Mia's certainty, Charlotte began to examine the bookshelf. It was solid oak, built into the wall, a part of the house's structure. She knocked on the panels, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. She ran her fingers along the edges of the boards, searching for a hidden latch or a seam. As she got closer to the area Mia was indicating, she felt it. A slight vibration in the air, an almost imperceptible drop in temperature. And then, her fingers found it. A small piece of wooden trim on the side of the bookcase felt slightly loose. She carefully pried at it. It wasn't trim. It was a peg. She pulled it out, and there was a soft click from within. A section of the bookshelf, cleverly disguised as a set of faux leather-bound encyclopedias, swung outward, revealing a hollow, dark compartment behind it. They both held their breath. Inside the dark space sat a small metal box, like a file box, and next to it, another leather-bound journal, smaller than the ledger. They took their discovery back to the relative safety of the kitchen. Charlotte placed the box and the journal on the table. This journal was different from the ledger. It was older, its leather softer and more worn. She opened it. Inside was Ethan's handwriting, but it was an Ethan she recognized. The script of their early days, less confident, more introspective. The journal began nearly a decade ago, shortly after they had moved to Maple Creek. The first pages were full of hope. He wrote about the house, about designing it, about finding the perfect piece of land. He wrote about discovering the local history and an almost boyish excitement as he stumbled upon the story of the Scorpion cult. At first, it was just a curiosity, a fun story about their new home. But as his business grew and the financial pressures mounted, the tone of the journal began to change. He started researching the cult more seriously. He became obsessed with the idea of their heart of power. Maybe they knew something, he wrote. Maybe there is a kind of energy here, something that can be harnessed. It was desperation dressed up in the guise of intellectual curiosity. Then, the journal chronicled his meeting with Julian. Julian had sought him out, presenting himself as an amateur historian also interested in the cult. He was a descendant of one of the original members. He had charmed Ethan with tales of power and wealth, promising that together they could rediscover the cult's secrets. Charlotte read in horror as Ethan described taking the first loans from Julian, not as a business transaction, but as an investment in their quest. Julian had funded Ethan's downfall, feeding his desperation while pretending to be his friend. The final entries were agonizing. Ethan had realized he was trapped. He had found what Julian wanted, but he had also discovered its true nature, and Julian's. He doesn't want power, Ethan wrote, his script shaky on the page. He wants the cage. He wants the jailer. I've hidden the key. I had to hide the key. He'll never find it. He can't. God forgive me. The key, Charlotte whispered. He wrote about hiding a key. She opened the metal box. Inside was no mystical artifact, just more paper. But this was different. Old surveyors' maps of their property, printouts from the town archives, and Ethan's own architectural blueprints for the house. On one of the blueprints for the living room, an area was circled in red pen. It was the massive stone fireplace, the one Ethan used to call the heart of the house. Next to the circle, he had written a cryptic note: where foundation meets history, the builder's first mark. Foundation meets history, Mia read over her mother's shoulder. That book said the cult believed their power came from the land itself, from the stones. Charlotte looked at the blueprint. She remembered how proud Ethan had been of that fireplace. He had insisted on using locally quarried stone, and specifically, he had found a massive cornerstone from an original 19th century structure on the property and used it as the foundation for the entire hearth. The builder's first mark, she said, her own heart beginning to beat faster. The cornerstone. They found a crowbar in the garage. The door, strangely, now worked again. The massive stone fireplace looked impenetrable. But when they examined the cornerstone, a huge, rough-hewn slab of granite at the base, they saw it. A hairline seam, almost invisible, where the mortar looked slightly newer. It took them the better part of an hour, a combined effort of prying and pulling, sweat beading on their foreheads. Finally, with a grating screech of stone against stone, the cornerstone popped loose, revealing a dark, hollowed-out cavity within. Inside, wrapped in an old oilcloth, was a small, lead-lined box. It was surprisingly heavy. With trembling hands, Charlotte lifted it out and placed it on the floor. She carefully pried open the lid. What lay inside was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't a glittering jewel or a golden relic. It was a black, dull object. A polished obsidian-like stone, the size of a human heart, that seemed to drink the light in the room. It was unnaturally cold to the touch, a cold that numbed the fingertips. Its entire surface was covered in intricate carvings that swirled into the shapes of stylized scorpions. This had to be the heart of power. It radiated an ancient and malevolent energy, but there was something else in the box, a single piece of old parchment folded and sealed with wax. The wax seal was broken. Ethan had read it. Charlotte carefully unfolded it. The script was an elegant 19th century hand, the ink faded to brown. This was the warning Ethan had found, the one that had terrified him. She read the warning aloud, her voice shaking. "Be wary, finder of the scorpion's heart. It is not a fount of power to be granted, but a prison to be kept. Within, the soul of the wanderer is contained, an entity of spite and division, bound to the stone by our order. It whispers lies to weaken the will. It eats at unity like acid. It promises dominion but brings only ruin. To possess it is to be possessed. To break the seal is to set it free. Let it sleep." Charlotte understood now. Julian didn't want power. He wanted to release what was trapped inside the stone. He wanted to unleash chaos. And Ethan, upon realizing this, had hidden it, becoming its reluctant jailer. As the horrifying truth of their discovery settled, Mia suddenly gasped. She wasn't looking at the stone. She was staring out at the dark plate glass windows of the living room. "Mom," she whispered, her voice filled with a new, different kind of fear. "He's not the only one out there anymore." Charlotte turned to look. At first, she saw nothing but the darkness of the woods. But then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Not a black SUV. Not men in suits. Eyes. Multiple pairs of eyes, glowing faintly, eerily, in the shadows at the edge of the yard. They were at different heights, some low to the ground, some in the branches of the trees. They were not the eyes of animals. They were watching, filled with hate and hunger. The spirits of the house, the other voices, had been drawn by the awakened stone. They were no longer confined to the walls. They had spilled outside. Charlotte looked from the malevolent obsidian heart in her hands to the watching eyes in the darkness. They had found the key. But in doing so, they hadn't just unlocked a secret. They had announced to all the monsters, living and dead, that the prison door was about to be opened. The siege had entered a new, terrifying phase. They were completely and truly surrounded.